Hi, everybody. I'm here with Andy English, and we're going to be talking about recruiter enablement. We're going to be talking about it from a couple of different angles. And then we're going to be going into some other interesting areas of like, how can we create great outcomes from recruitment technology? So, Andy, first of all, give us a quick introduction to you and your very interesting background, very interesting for me specifically, but I'm sure people are going to enjoy this.
Yeah, Adam, thanks for having me. We've had a lot of great guests on here, so hopefully I can add to that group. A little about me, first of all. So I live in Oxford in the UK, married, 2 children, 22 and 19, a couple of cats as well, so excuse me if we get joined by one of those today. I've been working from home since 2016 and in what we'll now refer to as a hybrid role since 2006. And I consider myself actually to be quite fortunate to say that I've probably spent more time working outside of the UK than inside of the UK, countries like India, Singapore, and various parts of the US. I've certainly done my travels, seen a lot of things from different angles, that's for sure.
Tell us about like how you got to like most recently you've been doing a lot of work in the recruitment technology, but give us from the beginning, like how did you get into recruitment? Did you fall into it? Did you choose to go into it? Like tell us the story.
For sure. So, I mean, I'm like many people. I fell into recruitment. I didn't really realize what it was at the time. That was back in 1996, and I can tell you after 6 months, I was like, this isn't for me. And actually, I was convinced by a colleague at the time to attend an interview with an RPO company. They said to me it would be different from what I was experiencing of working in like a traditional agency. So I took a leap of faith. Had an interview with that company and it panned out well. That company turned out to be Alexander Mann Solutions. I was actually employee 13 of that organization and was there for 10 fantastic years. Great place to work, great place to learn. And actually, since leaving, I'll be honest, I've often found myself in situations from a day-to-day perspective, wherever I've been working, where something's come up and the way I've addressed and resolved whatever that matter is through something I learned during my time at AMS. So I always look back on my time there fondly. And I spent, I suppose, the last 20 years now working in primarily TA technology, working with a bunch of vendors and also on the client side. Most recently as the HR tech lead for talent at General Motors. And I think one of the things that's, I don't want to go as far as saying unique, but fairly unique perhaps about me is that the amount of time I've spent on the vendor side and on the client side gives me a fairly unique and dual perspective to kind of to technology strategy and problem solving. Most people I meet have spent the vast majority of the time on one side of the house, which is great, but I think I have a little bit of a different view from having spent time on both sides.
Well, I want to come back to that later and talk about like how can everybody create better relationships and better outcomes, because you probably have better empathy than most people, having done what you said. It's not unique, but it's definitely unusual. So let's talk about the main kind of subject though, which is recruiter enablement. To me, it's all about how do we make recruiters more productive and successful. And technology can be an important part of this. Like over the last, whatever time frame you choose, like the last 2 years or 5 years or whatever it might be, what has changed? What's got better? And then what do you think is going to be coming?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think it's really important that we all think about technology as not an impact to recruiters, but how it can positively enable our recruiters. There's so much that we can have technology take care of for us from a recruiting perspective to allow the recruiters to spend time on true value-added tasks. So I think it's always relevant to think about the fact that technology, whatever type of technology you're using, it needs to be able to deliver quality analytics and insights to help the recruiters. That should underpin whatever technology you're using. And of course, let's be honest. Depending on the organization you're working in, the size of your tech stack, having a very well integrated tech stack is a huge win because it simplifies the journey, quite frankly, for whether it's candidates, recruiters, or the hiring community. But I think the big thing for me right now is and I'm sure it's on most people's minds, and will be for some time, is the use of AI in recruiting. For me, using the right AI tools is going to allow us to automate administrative tasks, and there's a lot it can do. And examples of those are, candidate engagement, resume screening, matching, scoring, things like interview scheduling, interview feedback, or generally feedback through the process, and all the way through to onboarding. And I think utilizing the right AI tool in the right way in those areas is a huge win for everybody. Everybody has got a lot on their plates these days. Recruiters are being asked to do more with less, or recruiting functions are being asked to do more with less. So where you can use technology to take away a lot of the administrative activities, I think is a huge win. From my perspective, maybe I'm a little bit biased because of the time I spent on the working with on the vendor side, but I think we need to embrace AI. It's not going to go away. Different organizations will have different perspectives on how entrenched they want to become with AI, and that's okay. But where you can maximize on it, for me, it's not going to replace recruiters. It comes back to enabling the recruiters to spend time on the human-centric tasks, which I think is so important. Things like hiring manager collaboration, personalized candidate communication, those things are really key. If we're having tech take care of transactional activities, that, if we're honest, and people should look at their processes and identify where do they think they could best use AI. But if we're using AI to take care of those activities and enabling recruiters to do the more value add, we're gonna find that the recruiting functions that are being asked to do more with less, that you're going to be able to do that. And I think that's really important for everybody to take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things you said at the beginning was to do with like the number of tools that a recruiter needs to use. And when I was doing focus groups last year around this subject, I did find that a lot of people were saying recruiters are absolutely overwhelmed with the number of different places they have to go to get all their tasks completed. What's your perspective on the need to try and keep a control over the number of different tools that are being used, with a lot of the most interesting and exciting things coming into our space right now and maybe doing one thing? So if you went with all of those, you could end up with like another, like, just too many new things and whatever. There's going to be a balance in there, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I think this is where my point to an effectively and accurately integrated tech stack comes into play, because you could be required to engage within your HCM and ATS, maybe a CRM, maybe matching tools, AI tech, your tools that you're using from a marketing perspective. But ultimately, if everything's integrated, you find that actually recruiters have the potential to only have to really work in one or two technologies, especially when you think about so much of the AI tools that exist today. They are acting on your behalf as a recruiter. You don't need to be going into that tech and say, okay, now do this, now do that. An integrated solution can literally have the AI trigger on the next step, the next activity, based on a step and status update that's being done to make sure the data is in an accurate place in your ATS.
So it seems like everybody is changing their ATS, and that seems to have been the case for the last 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's always like changing their ATS. How and it takes so long. I mean, the amount of people I know who have like put in, I'm not going to name particular technologies, but they've put in this technology or they've bought this technology, and it's like 12 months later and still not landed. It's still like, what are the best ways for, I mean, I'm really interested in this, being somebody who, is selling a recruitment technology product, but like, for people on both sides, like, what's the best way to make sure that the relationship works so everybody gets a good outcome when TA teams are buying new technology and implementing new technology.
Yeah, and I think this is a really important topic, because I think that this starts with making sure you've got the right relationship in place between a vendor and the client that's made the purchase. For sure, you need the right resources, whether it's project resources that are dedicated to a piece of work, whether it's subject matter experts that are coming in to discuss a particular area. But for me, that success of that relationship really comes down to 4 things. And I think the first one for me is transparency. I truly believe trying to build any partnership, transparency is key from both sides. I think clients need to be very clear with the vendors. What are their expectations? Right? What are the problems they're trying to solve, to make sure that they're engaging with vendors who can actually solve those problems. And vendors also need to make sure that they share what they can do and what they can't do. You know, it's important, in my opinion, whether I was on the vendor side or on the client side, a vendor needs to be able to say no if it's not something they offer. They can say, no, not today, but we can work on developing that for you. But let's be transparent, because otherwise you get too far down the path and you create a problem between both parties. So biggest call out on that first point on transparency really comes down to neither party should make any assumptions. Now, if we think about the implementation itself, you know, let's be straightforward. A client should not be buying a piece of tech that should solve a problem without being prepared to review and most likely change their processes. Because if you just, I've seen organizations try and do a lift and shift. What's going to improve? Because technology isn't a magic wand. Technology has got to be underpinned by the right processes, right? And if an organization isn't able to sit there and say, okay, here's our processes today, or let's document our existing processes and look at what we should improve. Let's share those with the vendor and engage in a conversation to say, how can we make this better? You know, the tech isn't the problem. I'll repeat that. 99% of the time, the tech isn't the problem. It's the way in which it's been implemented. And that could be from a very small part that we think didn't really make a difference, but when you look at the end-to-end solution, it does, to you know, it's just some glaring misses. So for me, you know, let's assume that during the sales process, the vendor's not sold, you know, a dream, they've sold reality, and that the client is very clear and open and engaged in that implementation process, and that's through the design, through testing, through making sure their readiness from a change management perspective is in place. You've got a really strong chance of not 6 months later, once the solution's live, going, this isn't right for us. You know, we've got to remember, new tech is coming out all the time. But think about, what are your problems? It's great to go and buy the next new shiny piece of kit, but if it's not solving a problem, then it doesn't make any sense. So it comes back to, let's make sure we're focused during that implementation. The last part around this is risks in an implementation. Vendors can identify them, clients can identify them. Never, ever stop putting them on the table, because if you don't raise them, nobody can do anything about it. It's so important. If there's a risk, or you think there's a risk, get it out there, get it discussed, because then both sides are able to work together to get that resolved. So I think thirdly, I'd talk about optimization. So, you know, a lot of vendors will do regular check-ins, whether that's, you know, maybe weekly in the early days, moving to monthly, you know, talking about how adoption's going, talking about, you know, open issues, and things like QBRs are great. Quarterly business reviews, where, you know, you can look at utilization, you can look at, you know, how are we actually getting working towards, you know, the ROI that we are aiming for with a particular piece of tech. I think optimization doesn't get focused on enough. From a vendor perspective, vendors are releasing new functionality all the time. We've got to make sure those are in front of your clients. And though, to me, it's not enough to say, I'm just going to send the new release notes out to my clients. From a client-to-client perspective, how are they using the technology? What's the new functionality that's being released that's going to add value? And show to the clients, get on a call, demonstrate the new functionality, because sometimes you need to bring it to life. And from the client side, if you're not hearing about new functionality that's being released, ask the question. It's so important. And secondly, if you've got a challenge, it might not be on part of the existing process that you're using a particular piece of tech for, but if you've got a challenge, share it with not just one vendor, all of your vendors, because it's in their interest to help you solve that. And I think finally, the most important part to me, the other three are all super essential, but possibly the most important to me is when you think about a client viewing their vendors as trusted partners and advisors. You know, let's be transparent, right? It's pretty clear to us all. No client signs a contract with a vendor that they don't believe in, right? They're not going to spend that money, go through that process to pick a vendor, engage, sign contracts, implement if they don't believe in that vendor. And at the same time, there isn't a vendor that exists that wants to sign an initial contract and then walk away. They want to be having renewals. Retention for vendors is essential. So, you know, clients need to think about, I've got this relationship, we've had a positive experience through the implementation. Let's constantly work in partnership and ask the vendors for advice. Think about how they can resolve your challenges. I've touched on this a little bit earlier on, but the vendors, whether your direct point of contact or their colleagues, should be able to support you with recommendations and advice on how to deal with certain challenges. And you know, clients should want to be engaging with their vendors in this way and having like what we term as those regular kind of solution health checks to ensure they're on track to help reap the benefits that they're expecting. And that circles us back to the ROI we were talking about a little while ago. You know, from a client's perspective, whatever vendor you're working with or whatever vendors you're working with, you're investing money, right? And you've got to make sure you get that return on that investment, because otherwise from above, you know, there's going to be pressure on when it comes to renewal of why should we extend a particular vendor. So if you don't focus on that trusted partnership and advisor space, I think you're liable to have a big miss.
Right. I mean, I know all of those points that you just talked about there, I know you could go into them all in a lot more detail, but like that summary of those 4 different areas, extremely useful. So Andy, thank you very much for taking the time to join me today and talk about this. I've really enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.